Chris, then we'll you.
Well, just quite simply, we are talking about a highly unrefined product, and that somebody, because of making a good profit, wants to send back down south in something that isn't made for it. So it of course, in any other place in the world, that doesn't happen, because we have all sorts of regulations and all sorts of correct answers to not, that doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. So they have to do bring the refining to where the product starts. Mm-hmm. And I think even in the high media you hear some people asking that question. We still haven't heard any good answers to it. Mm-hmm. But that's what I think what has to start. It doesn't make sense, any of it. And profit is hard to combat in this country when you don't have enough laws and regulations. But it's a sad thing that any renewable energy should be criticized for its good purpose just because of this case. Mm-hmm. And so I just ask, what do you hear about bringing the process plants or whatever is required to refine the product at where it comes out?
Mm-hmm. There's not a lot of talk about new refineries. I know there is something going on over in West Virginia that may go to an eastern seaboard area. But you're right. It's all about dollars, and it's all about who's in control of what assets now that can capitalize on it. When the Bluegrass Pipeline and the Kinder Morgan Pipeline were both being discussed, they're saying, well, at current rates of production of natural gas liquids, probably only one of these pipelines fully utilized would be necessary. So I think whoever was furthest ahead, and maybe there was some trade-offs or under the table sharing, I don't know who's actually on board with the remaining pipeline that's still in play. You know, it could be the Boardwalk Partners decided that, and I'm just purely speculating, that they maybe formed another partnership, because you never know corporately what's going on behind the scenes. But again, I think you're right. You have to ask about other options, you know, and just because it is the cheapest, obviously it's not the best. And that refinery closest to where the liquids are generated, I've always thought that what's going on in Pennsylvania and will follow to Ohio, and eventually they'll chase this pipeline and frack all the way to the south, if that is economically feasible. And having the pipeline in place to do it will just accelerate it.
The experience with Bluegrass Pipeline has made me very hopeful about government on a local level, and I don't want to be cynical, but it has been really an eye-opening experience for government on the larger, broader level. The lack of regulation, the lack of will to change legislation that doesn't mention natural gas liquids, which didn't exist when the legislation was written. The fact that we have to work so hard to address some of those issues just kind of makes me wonder. And I mean, what you're saying is absolutely true. And as long as business and the dollars rule, they'll do whatever is to their economic advantage. And right now it's to get it south quickly and do it down there and export it.
And if they did succeed in building big refineries closer to the source, wouldn't they be even more committed to continue the fossil fuel track rather than the renewable tracks?
Too. That's a good point.
If billions and billions are invested in those plants, then they're going to use them. So in some ways, I don't want to see them building there. Woman behind Chris and then Ron.
Okay. This has to do with the use of the existing old pipelines. I was in a meeting just a few weeks ago, and it was a group that was very concerned about this, so they weren't on the other side. But when that came up, one of the people in the group seemed to know a lot about the process, and he said that what they're planning to do and what they do when they use old pipelines is reline them. It was a very complicated process of what they do. I mean, and he wasn't for using it, don't get me wrong, but he just said they don't just use the pipeline like it is. There's a very extensive process of relining it with a material that is supposedly, you know, makes it safer.
Okay.
I just thought do
Yes.
you know anything about that?
I don't.
Well, this seemed to be a
Makes
pretty
sense.
accepted
Yeah.
thing.
It
Yeah,
makes sense,
thanks for-
because that's what they do with a lot of existing sewer lines. And things, you know.
And that, you know, so I think before we go out and want to spread the word, we want to be sure that we have all the facts. And I mean, that doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it completely safe, but they do that. Okay,
Okay,
so
thank you.
that might be. And then my other question, and you can address this and we'll let somebody else talk, but you know, how are we going to spread the word? And give us some techniques that we can use to, and how can planning and zoning really do something? I don't know. Okay, that's all I'll say.
Well, I've followed some of the emails that Tom Fitzgerald he's kind of tracking some of the new, I guess, conversation, and he's the one that kind of identified some of the local control right questions and processes, and I agree with Sister Claire. We do have some power at the local level, and it's not just to be obstructionist and to slow the process down, make them frustrated, and go somewhere else. But I think that, you know, in asking real, what I'd call conscientious questions, and getting bona fide answers to the longevity and expectations of a pipeline. And there are probably some technologies, like you mentioned, of sleeving that or lining that to, you know, assure some degree of safety. Obviously, they're getting their eyes open that they just can't roll through it haphazardly, I don't think, and shouldn't be able to, obviously. But I think that it is a process that we all that are affected by it have the right and have the responsibility in leadership positions to try to get all the answers that we possibly can, and find who to ask the questions to, and then enlist all the support of the grassroots here and at the ground level where it's most affected and going to run through our yards. You know, show up to meetings and encourage other people to do the same. And numbers do talk. I think that's the bottom line.
Good. Does everybody here know who Tom Fitzgerald is? We've mentioned him several times, but Tom is the director of Kentucky Resources Council. He's an environmental lawyer. He's been working for 35 years to try and protect Kentucky's land and water and air. He's an amazing, wonderful man. So, okay, Ron?
First of all, this has been very useful tonight. I have a lot to learn, and this is a good way for me to learn the overview and some of the details. One of the details that I have in terms of questions, obviously we have a safety problem now with $80 million in damages over the past 10 years and 19 federal enforcement actions just on natural gas. I wonder, however, we talk about the transportation of the natural gas liquids in the pipelines at much higher pressure. My question is, do we know what pressure is required to either compress or pump that liquid as opposed to the gas? Is it 2 times as much, 3 times as much, or less? I mean, that's a technical question. It may be an engineering question we may not have tonight, but I think that question will be asked at some point, and we probably need to have that answer. Because if we assume it's going to be higher, I've talked to 2 different engineers and they have different answers in terms of whether it's either going to be higher or lower, for example. So that's one question I have, and I don't know if there's an answer available tonight, but if we're assuming just because it's a liquid, by definition, it's going to be much higher, maybe it is, but I guess how much higher, and is it still within the specifications of the pipe, even though the pipe is older?
Well, I've heard so many different little stories. I guess they had a meeting over at E-Town, and some of the Bluegrass Boardwalk people were over there, and they were talking about that they test at least double the pressures that it's going to be operating under, and their assurances that the pipeline would be safe. Of course, they were talking about building from scratch about half this pipeline. They were going to intersect with a pipeline in Breckinridge County and repurpose an existing line. That was part of a repurpose project too. They didn't say how they were going to assure that the old line was as good as the new one, but they were going to obviously do all this smart pig testing, and they were throwing out answers right and left, and for people that don't know what's the right answer, it's pretty easy to accept, because those individual, what I'd call engineering specs, and Joe Denny I wish he'd have come, because he talked about this gas line. He's kept up with it on his property ever since this explosion happened 40 years ago. And he's aware that this 24-inch line that blew out started out when he first moved up there, and it was operating about, I think he said, around 1,200 pounds of pressure. Now, either due to decreased demand or the fact that the three lines are no longer quite necessary to carry with a quite volume, they've lowered that to, I think he said that 600 pounds, less, about half of what it used to be compressed under, because probably don't have to force the same volume to the northeast with new development up there, and just haven't had the, and plus it does lower the danger by half, I'd say, if maybe not more when you cut the pressure in half. So, the old line, probably, the explosion at Nifley was out of the blue, and if that was one of those lowered gas pressure lines, it shows you how vulnerable they even still are. So I think, it does make us ask serious questions about how long a line will last. I don't care whether they sleeve it or not, They'd have to do something to it for sure.
Well, didn't the engineer say that he was still concerned, even
Yeah,
though?
I mean, yes, I mean, it was still a group that didn't think it was a good idea, but I just thought I'd mention that.
It is one
that
idea,
I think that
yeah.
it will come up.
If I could, just my very brief question. Have pipelines of this nature been approved in other parts of the country, or is this the first trial effort at this for NGLs?
There's some other natural gas liquids being transported, and there's obviously some issues with them, I guess, out in the one that was really publicized, where was that, Parachute, Colorado. I mean, there's been some examples cited that have had some pretty disastrous leaks, and those are things that really raise the questions that we're asking now, because of it's still so new technology and very much unproven.
That was a 4-inch pipeline. I don't know if there's been any at a 24-inch
Oh,
size.
is this a 4-inch? Yeah.
The Parachute, Colorado was a 4-inch pipeline. Barbara?
Some of the questions about pipelines or the PSIs, whatever, I think it's called PSIs. The one thing I think several of us involved with Boardwalk found out that where I think our strength is by just getting together and talking. You learn more information from other people, and you'll be amazed at the people that can give you the facts and the details that you know at the local levels. I was just amazed at the wealth of information that people had from this area, from Woodford County, up to northern Kentucky south, the people that pulled together with information. And that's what we need to do with this problem that we're working with, or to find out the facts and the information. Names like Dick Watkins, he's excellent with pipes and PSIs and how they replace them and the strengths and the weaknesses. Or, Ralph Ewers with geology and the questions we have. But so many local people with information that as we get together and we talk more, we can find out again on the local level how we can pull together to have more strength.
And I think in some ways this company thought coming into Kentucky, we would just roll over. But the number of really bright, well-educated, very skillful people who joined this coalition from north to south, we had all kinds of expertise available, just as you said, from local people.